everybody, and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about Action Comics issue 1094, written by Mark Waid, with art and colors by Patricio Delpeche and letters by Steve Wands. The government come calling for Superboy this issue, as in Smallville's public library, Superboy helps the librarian sort all of the books, getting it done in a flash. As it turns out, all of these books are new, as Superboy managed to convince billionaire Robert Queen, that's Oliver Queen's father, into donating hundreds of new books to the Smallville library. Again, just little mentions like this are all we need at the hints of the larger world outside of Smallville, and Waid is the king of doing these. We're not cutting to what Bruce Wayne is up to, or what's going on Themyscira, or all these other heroes. We just get these little hints of the larger world. Once Clark finishes with the library, he heads to Lana's house for a study session, and I like the bits and pieces we get of Lana's home life here, and how Clark sees the Langs, who are very much well regarded in Smallville and a little bit affluent. They're a little bit of a rich family, as they live in a huge house in the Smallville suburbs. It's not all good though, as Lana's father doesn't like Clark at all, and Clark gets this kind of odd feeling from him, since he doesn't understand why such a learned man like Louis Lang, who's an archaeologist and has traveled around the world to different dig sites, isn't working for some big university or teaching somewhere. So all this stuff with Louis is kind of old school comic stuff. Louis, or sometimes he goes by Thomas Lang as well, depending on the reality that they're writing in, is an archaeologist and he's had adventures and stuff like that, but he's usually a character like no one wants to write for. Like no one really cares about Lana Lang's parents. You know, if it's like Smallville's continuity, they are killed off in the opening minutes of the first episode, so they're kind of nothing characters. But what Waid is doing here, the hints he drops throughout this part here, it seems like he's going to be setting something up with Louis Lang, like something that puts him on a collision course with Superboy in some ways, and I like that he makes it known it's not going to be something criminal or abusive. It's just going to be something that is going to make these two people clash, which is really quite interesting. I think it'd be cool if Waid does something like they did in the 80s, where the Langs were abducted by, I think it was manhunters, and I think they were later killed, but that'd be like a cool adventure, like Clark's first time into space, he's got to save the Langs from the manhunters or something. But I do like what's set up here, where Waid does signpost pretty heavily that, hey, we're going to be coming back to this Louis Lang stuff very soon. Clark gets to his study session with Lana, and there's an interesting idea presented here, as Clark is enamored by Lana, but it's not out of some hormonal teen angst lust or anything like that, but because of how, despite being very well read, smarter and more sophisticated than anyone in town, Lana does her best to hide all of that, since she just wants to be accepted by everyone else. So much like Clark, she too has a bit of a secret identity. This is such an interesting thing, since it's framing it as a way as Clark is trying to sort of, like, without revealing that he's Superboy to her, kind of learn from her in a way, and like how she does it and how she balances that stuff, because that's one of the things that Clark has been suffering throughout this entire run, and that's on purpose, is that he's been trying to find that balance in his life between Superboy and Clark Kent, and trying to find something that he can hold on to, in terms of, like, he wants to tell someone he has these abilities but he knows he can't, and it's really weighing on him, and he's trying to figure that out. And I like that it's the people around him that are teaching him this sort of stuff, and he's learning from them, and there's that really cool back and forth where obviously he's inspiring them to do good, and in return they're inspiring him by giving him little ideas for how to deal with his own secret identity. It's a really nice cycle. Later, after the study session finishes and Clark heads home, he gets a call from General Lane via the signal device only Clark can hear, which I guess is the prototype to the signal watch that Superman will one day have. Superboy arrives at Sam Lane's military base, and the general says that they need Superboy's help with a mission of national importance. For this, Superboy will have to wear a special uniform resembling that of a soldier, and I love how this is all intentional. You know, this suit Clark has to wear is kind of stripped of any individuality or personality. It's literally a soldier's uniform with a little Superman symbol up on the upper chest plate. I love the look Clark gives the suit as well. He's like horrified, as it's something that he doesn't want to become. He doesn't want to become that weapon or that tool of the military industrial complex. Also, the costume is very similar to the Jeff Johns era new Kryptonian military uniforms, the stuff Zod and company would wear, so that's kind of a nice touch. I don't know whether that's intentional or not, but I quite like that. That's where my mind went when I thought about this. Things Clark Clark does not want to be or become. As Clark suits up, Sam tells him how the symbol on his suit will glow, and since it's nighttime over in the small nation of Modora, it will make him spottable by their soldiers. The general tells him about how the Modoran agents kidnapped Silas Stone, the government's lead weapons engineer and of course, father of Victor Stone, future cyborg. A group of Spec Ops soldiers were sent in to retrieve Dr. Stone, but they were attacked by some kind of weapon that causes nausea and vertigo, and because of it, they have become trapped behind enemy lines. Sam wants the soldiers, Stone, and the weapon Modora is working on to be brought back home safely. Having suited up, Superboy heads for Modora and finds the American soldiers under attack by the Modoran forces. But as he gets closer and goes to land, he finds something is affecting him and he crashes headlong into the building the soldiers are holed up in. As Clark rights himself, he realizes the weapon the Modorans are using is affecting him, and now he has become completely deaf. This is a really cool threat for Superboy, and much like the bank in the last issue, it's something he can't actually physically fight with his powers. He's got to adapt. He can't fight something he cannot see in the air that's affecting him. So how is he going to deal with that? He might not have a lot of time though, since as he meets with the soldiers, telling them he can't hear them, but he plans on getting them to safety all the same, they soon come under attack. Superboy is able to shield the soldiers from the hail of gunfire, and as the soldiers evacuate the building, he finds a soldier has been killed. Clark knows that this was the first dead body he has ever seen, and he wants to stop and have a moment, but he knows he can't since this is war. This was an interesting direction since I knew Clark would be exposed to the horrors of war and we would get to see that firsthand, and I thought there was going to be that moment where we see it greatly affect him and he kind of breaks from, what he's there to do and goes kind of rogue against Sam Lane, and that leads to some conflict or anything. But I kind of liked that he doesn't. He's kind of the more mature Clark. He knows he has a task at hand. He knows he needs to get these men to safety, so he can't, go rogue or anything. He has to complete this. He's using the skills he learned from Captain Comet to help the soldiers out, and he does so by creating an ice wall around them and blocking sniper shots from hitting them. One, however, gets hit in the shoulder and is wounded, and it makes Clark realize that staying on top of the ground is not a good idea. So instead, he uses his powers to carve a deep trench into the ground, ushering the soldiers down into the trench as he flies above them, covering them from the snipers. I really like what Wade is doing here, since I think a lesser writer would have had Clark just fight the enemy soldiers outright, use his heat vision to melt their guns, or, confront them and, smack them around a little bit or something like that. He would get involved. But I like that Clark here is practically a neutral entity. He's just trying to make sure no one gets killed or seriously injured. He's not actively attacking or participating in the conflict. Eventually, they reach the rescue chopper waiting just across the border, and as they cross the border, Clark's hearing comes back, making him realize whatever has caused him to lose his hearing wasn't some nerve gas or chemical that Sam Lane thought. It's something proximity-based. The soldier's commander is pissed that since he's never failed a mission in the 9 years he's been active, and he knows they just did since they didn't retrieve Dr. Stone or the weapon, but Clark knows he hasn't failed just yet, using his X-ray vision to scour the city and find Dr. Stone. Superboy smashes into the warehouse Stone is being held in and is immediately overcome by the deafness again, making him realize that the weapon these people are using is some type of ultrasonic sound device that wreaks havoc on the inner ear of a soldier, and since Clark's inner ear is much more sensitive, it affects him even more. Clark spots the Modoran leader who is trying to give him the classic villain speech, but Clark can't actually hear anything he is saying. The sonic device is too powerful, and the commander turns it up even more, making Clark become overcome with pain. Silas tells him to get out of there before he is killed by it, but the Modoran leader gloats about Superboy not being able to hear Silas, thinking the American Superboy is not up to snuff and is nothing to write home about. The commander is pleased with his weapon's effects though, and the Modoran general considers the possibility of mass producing the weapon and using it against America. Clark is overcome by the device, feeling like all he can do is scream, and that's when he gets a pretty damn cool idea. he is just going to scream. So after calling for Silas to get behind him, Superboy screams at the top of his lungs, which unleashed a sonic boom so loud the soldiers he rescued and took to the chopper earlier heard him from half a mile away. The blast also destroys the machine and knocks out the Modoran general and his men. And while everyone is safe, Silas is left with permanent tinnitus because of it. Another really cool use of Superboy's powers, and one we never really get to see much of, the sonic boom that Superman can create. And when he does create it, usually it's him flying really fast, or he does the hand clap we've seen a couple of times to, put fires out or, disrupt a villain or something. But it's never really a scream, so it was neat to see Wade actually use that as a weapon that Superman can use against these people, a non-lethal weapon, if that. With the soldiers defeated, Clark gets Silas to safety before returning to the dead soldier he found earlier, covering the man in his cape and taking the body with him out of Modora. He knows while the pilot's death wasn't on him, since the pilot was very much dead before he arrived in country, it still doesn't give him much comfort. The thought ticks on in Clark's head even when he gets home, and it makes him realize that he isn't ready to be a soldier. And not only that, he finds himself in a bit of a hopeless spot, since while he has Ma and Pa to open up to, he didn't have anyone his own age or anyone he can relate to talk about the dead soldier to, or how confusing it is to have more power than anyone else on the planet. I really like that Wade is doing these moments with Clark where he kind of retreats into himself and kind of feels sorry for himself a little bit, because he doesn't have anyone his age to talk to. He can talk to his parents, but you can only talk to your parents about certain things, like up to a certain level. You gotta have someone your age who understands what you're talking about and understands what you are going through. And I think that's something that this book has been doing really well, which is making Clark relatable and the struggles he's going through. While it's about how he uses his powers, it's also about being a teenager, something everyone goes through, and everyone has gone through these type of moments, whether it be dealing with a girl you like, or stuff like this, where you might not have someone you can talk to about things in your life, but you want that. And I like that Wade is able to actually write that really well, which is really astonishing, being that I said this before, Wade is an older gentleman, and none of this comes across as the boomer writing a younger generation. There's none of that how do you do fellow kids writing about it, which is honestly insanely great. And I love that Wade can do that. I think it goes to show just how good of a writer he is. One thing as well about this part is that despite all of this and what he feels about himself and how he's feeling a bit sorry for himself, Clark still thinks about Sam Lane and how to honor his arrangement with him, since he doesn't want to be a soldier anymore and he wants to find a way to keep that promise to Sam. So even when he's being quite self-loathing and thinking about himself, Clark is still thinking about others and his promises. Eventually, Clark goes on his camping trip with Pete, but he is still feeling rather lost since he can't tell Pete he's Superboy. Pete picks up on Clark's vibes and knows that something is up, and that makes Clark realize that he actually could tell Pete this, since they've been friends since they were 5 years old and they were almost like brothers, so he would understand what Clark is going through. Later that night, Clark plans on telling him, but he is called away when he hears two campers being attacked by two vicious bears. He saves the campers, carrying the giant animals off so they calm down. Clark overhears the campers talk about how they were lucky that Superboy was there, but they cannot tell their son back home what happened, since he was so worried about them going camping and it would just freak him out. This makes Clark doubt about telling Pete, since what right does he have to put that huge weight on Pete's shoulders? Clark returns to the camp and changes, returning to bed and deciding not to tell Pete. However, it's too late, as Pete has been awake this entire time and has seen Clark leave as Superboy and return, realizing that his best friend is indeed the hero Superboy. This is such a great cliffhanger, and I totally get Clark's thought process here of wanting to tell his friend and share his life with his best friend, but also that's a very big thing to ask of him and a lot to put on his shoulders, and it would put him in danger, and just the mental toll that would take on someone as well. He doesn't want to do any of that to his friend, so he's trying to think of his friend's well-being, and that's probably going to come back and bite him in the ass a little bit. Pete also learning and then not saying anything is interesting as well, since that's got to totally disrupt his and Clark's relationship, so I'm looking forward to Wade getting to explore that in the next issue. Action Comics issue 1094 continued just about everything I have been loving about Mark Waid's run on the series. It's got great creative action, good use of Superboy's powers, a gripping character study of Clark and his wrestle with trying to figure out his place in life, and some really fun world building. I love everything that Mark Waid has been doing with Clark and how he's exploring how Clark is being torn by being Superboy as well as having a life as a teenager, and he's trying to find that balance. And there's something very relatable I think everyone throughout their teenage years has gone through in this story, which is probably why I like it so much. It's relatable, it's something we've all done. The overall story with the government I kind of wish had gotten a little bit more traction in this book, being that it was all based around Clark working for Sam Lane, but I'm hoping that that story comes in a little bit more in the later issues, being something very big happens in this issue where Clark has to stop working for the government. So I'd love to see more of that and see what it develops into before he becomes Superman. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10.